Well, thanks for sticking it out. I know it's been a long day for a lot of you. And let me know if you can't hear me. I'm Gail Eskes. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist and a professor at Dalhousie University. And I do research on how to develop and understand the effects of brain injury or stroke on cognition in individuals. Today I'm not going to talk about my research per se. I'm going to talk about what we've learned about from many decades of research in memory and how that works, and then give you a few tips on how you might be able to use that research to help your own memories. And I would just want to do a little poll here. We don't have a lot of people, but how many of you think your memory is as good as it was 10 years ago? So we have one optimist. How many would like to improve their memory or feel like you could do better? Okay. Oh, and so there you go. So this is what I'm going to be talking to you about. And I really want to thank the Brain Injury Association of Nova Scotia and Rebecca from March of Dimes for inviting me to talk about this, because this is one of my most favorite topics to tell you about. And so I'm going to, in the next little while, as I said, I'm going to give you a bit of a user's guide to memory. What is memory? What do we mean by when we talk about memory? What are the different types of memory? How are memories made? Because if you know how they're made, then it's easier for you to make them yourself more efficiently. And then a few of those tips on how to improve your memory or make it more efficient in times where you would like it to be that way. So you all have been sitting. Whoops. So I'm going to do a little demonstration. And you'll have to bear with me. There aren't very many people here, so I don't know if the demonstration is going to work. But we'll see. And if anything else, it'll at least get you thinking and talking. Okay? So I'm going to do a demonstration on different ways to study or to learn things. And what I want you to do is I'm going to read out a pretty short list of words. And I want you to say to yourself whether the word has an E or a G. Okay? An E or a G in it. And you don't have to write anything down. Just say to yourself, oh yeah, there's an E, or oh yeah, there's a G, or there's an E and a G. Okay? That's all I want you to do. Does that make sense? Okay, and I'm sorry, I know we have a lot of people remotely, and so if you want to try it on your own, please feel free. Okay, so are you ready for the list? Okay, here we go. Evening. Country. Salt. Easy. Peace. Morning. Pretty. Expensive. Poor. Doctor. City. Dry. Okay, that's the list. So what were you doing when you were trying to decide whether it was an E or a G? You were what? You were listening, yeah. And how did you determine whether there was an E in it? You visualize it, right? So you saw it in your mind, and you tried to sort of look at, what are the letters in the word? Okay, and when you think about studying or reading something, that's what we do, right? We look at words and we read them. So now I want you to just take a second, and you don't have to write them down if you don't have any paper, but I want you to try to remember and recall the words that I just read to you. Just as many as you can. I'll tell you, I told you 12, if that helps. I'll just give you a minute. And no pressure here. I'm not trying to test your memory or anything. You can just count them on your fingers if you want. Okay, we'll keep it short because I know this has been a long afternoon. So how many remembered 3? Okay, great. How about 5? Very good. Brains are still working this afternoon. How about 7? Okay, a little harder. Okay, and I won't go any further than that. Okay, keep that in mind, and now I have one more way to study. This time, I'm going to read you a list. It's a different list, the same length, and I want you this time to think about whether the word refers to something pleasant or unpleasant to you, okay? There's no right or wrong answer to that, just what it means to you. Is it pleasant or unpleasant, okay? Here are the words: cold, love, bargain, war, hate, wet, rich, nurse, pepper, hard, ugly, hat. Okay, what are you doing that time when you're thinking about the word? Right, you're making an association to something that's personal to you, right? Okay, so now I'm going to give you another minute. See if you can remember any of these. You can just count them on your fingers. Okay. How many remembered 3? Okay. About the same number of hands. How about 5? Very good. 7? Hey. 8? Look at this crowd over here. 10. Wow, we're still going. 12? Okay, that was probably too much to ask. But so this is I want you to remember this demonstration as we go through the material, and you'll see, hopefully that'll help you understand what I'm trying to teach you about this. Okay, so maybe I have to do that. You noticed that, did you? There were pairs of words that were opposites. That's right, cold and hot. Yeah, very good, yes. It's whatever it meant to you. Yeah. You could have a pepper, or you could pepper someone with questions, or, there could be lots of ways of thinking about pepper, that's true. The fact that you're actually thinking about what does it mean is the critical piece, right? Exactly. Okay, so what is memory? So memory isn't actually just one thing. We have many different types of memories, and they actually operate on different principles, and they live in different parts of your brain. And normally on a day-to-day basis, they all work together. But they can be differentially affected by things like brain injury, lack of sleep, stress, aging. And so knowing about all three of them, we can figure out how can you use one to help the others if they're not working as well. Okay, the first type of memory is in the science world called episodic memory. But what that is really is memory for the daily episodes in your life. They could be events that happen in your remote history, such as where you went to high school. They could be more recent memories, such as what you had for dinner last night. And they could also be your future plans, such as I have to make that doctor's appointment, or I'm going to call my friend, or I want to pay this bill. So this type of memory actually lets you time travel. If you think about it, you can go to your past, and you can also visit your future. This type of memory is very contextual. It has a lot of associations. So when you think about your former high school, you might remember what that locker smelled like, or what the PA system sounded like when they were making announcements, or who your best friend was, or that awful English teacher who made you always check your spelling. So you have emotional associations, you might have sensory associations, and that's that type of daily memory, or your mental diary or planner, is unique in that sense, that it has all those relevant associations. And when we talk about memory, that's usually the one we're talking about. What did I do yesterday? What movie did I see? What was her name? The kicker with this type of memory is that it's actually designed to fade. So if it isn't very important to you, then why keep it around? So it only stays around if you pay attention to it, if you think about it again and again, and you re-experience it or reimagine it. Then your brain knows it's important, and it wants to hold on to it. It's a bit like thinking about telling a story to yourself. And if you continually tell that story, then you're going to hold on to that story. But imagine if your brain stored everything that happened to you, and you were trying to remember something, and you did a little search, and it was like getting a Google search out of it. And you had pages and pages of material that you had to go through to find that one thing that you were trying to remember. So the brain is set up not to do that. It's not set up to store things necessarily. It's only set up to store what's important. And that's the key to that type of memory. The second type of memory is called semantic memory, or your memory for facts and words. It's like your mental encyclopedia. It's like knowing what words mean. What does pepper mean? Or what does capital mean? There's lots of different meanings of the word capital. It's like knowing what's 2 times 3. It's like knowing what's the capital of Saskatchewan. These types of memories don't have a lot of context. You don't really remember very much about when you learned them anymore, unless it was a really extraordinary event. And they tend to feel like they more pop into your head when you're trying to retrieve something like the meaning. In fact, you use words all the time with their meanings, and you don't even think about the fact that you're recalling those meanings. This is the system that actually works with you, and it's necessary for you to interpret everything that's going on around you in terms of making those daily memories. So these two systems have to work together. The third memory system is called your procedural memory system, or your motor memory, or your memory for skills and habits. So this is a system that's based on skills that you've learned or routines that you've done over and over and over again, so much so that they're done without thinking anymore. They're habits. It's like riding a bicycle or being, if you're a skilled typist, typing on the keyboard. Or it's also can be very, if you do things the same way every day, it can also be things like where you put your keys, and you just automatically put them on the key stand. A lot of our behavior is guided by these habits. And in some ways, that's a good thing because it lets us multitask. So when you're driving your car or you're walking down the road or even just brushing your teeth, you don't have to think about how to brush your teeth. You do that automatically. And that lets you think about, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or, what am I going to wear to bed? Or, making plans. And so that's a good thing. We're set up to be able to set things on automatic so that we can get a lot of things done when we need to. The downside to that is that when you're doing things on automatic, you're not really experiencing them. So how many of you had the experience of driving your car home from work and realizing that you don't even remember the trip? Or, going on even on the bus and taking the same route each time and thinking about, what happened on that particular trip. So you put things on automatic, and you were probably doing more planning about what you were going to do when you got there, et cetera. So it's a good system. We need this system because it allows us to operate and to function, but it's a system that can get in your way if you're using it too much and all the time. This is kind of slow, isn't it? There we go. So now I want to get into how our memory's made as a way of illustrating how these systems work. So actually, memory isn't like something that's in a filing cabinet in your brain. I always wait not quite long enough. And memories are actually stored as a network or traces in your brain. And that network is created by the parts of the brain that are active when you're actually experiencing that event. So when you are, you're sitting here listening to me, you're hearing me, you're seeing me, you're thinking about things perhaps. Maybe you feel the uncomfortable because you've been sitting for so long. All of these impressions are happening at the same time. And memories are formed then by those parts of the brain that are active actually connecting up. And we know this, and we give credit to this idea to actually Donald O. Hebb, who was a native Nova Scotian. And he's a very famous neuroscientist. And he said, cells that fire together, that is, the parts of your brain that are active, wire together. So when you're doing something, experiencing something, those parts of the brain that are firing are actually making temporary connections with each other. And the more you're actively experiencing something, the more things you're taking in or associating with, the more pieces of the brain are active, and the more rich the network is. And the network becomes stronger when it's more complicated and you've got more pieces to it, and with re-experiencing that network. And in fact, when you go to retrieve something, which I'll tell you about in a minute, you're actually activating that same network. So it's really important to think about this as a very active memory trace. Now, there are actually 3 steps. So this is a talk about threes. The 3 memory systems, which are episodic, semantic, procedural, right. And now we're going to have 3 steps to making memory. The first step is receiving, then recording, then retrieving. I call it the 3 R's. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about each one. Receiving is when you put the spotlight on whatever is going on, and you do this active experiencing, and you are engaged and paying attention to whatever is going on at the moment. So this attention and this experiencing is what allows you to create that rich network that is going to eventually hook up together and maintain that memory in your brain. And it's really think about it as sort of creating this network is really like creating a story about this particular thing that's going on. And having that story and all those links then makes it easier to get to again later. And the more the links are personally relevant, the more the links are maybe perhaps associating with things that you already know, the stronger the memory trace is going to be. So just as an example, when we did those two different types of study skills, the E's and the G's, you weren't really thinking about what the word meant. You were thinking about what does it look like. And so your visual system was really active, and you were really looking at the words. You know, it's sort of like you could read a book that way, but you don't remember it as well as if you're thinking about, oh, is this pleasant or unpleasant? And what does that mean? And how do I relate to that? So those are the two these kinds of ways of dealing with this information creates very different traces in the brain. Recording is the next step. Now, recording is really about creating those links and making them more permanent. And that actually takes structural changes in the brain. And these changes take time. It can take hours, days, months. And these changes are very vulnerable until they become more permanent. And that's why things like when you have a brain injury, you might not remember recent things right before the injury because your network hasn't yet hooked up very well. And so it's interrupted. Stress can decrease the ease with which your brain creates those links. Not getting enough sleep. Medications can interfere. So this is an ongoing dynamic process. And the more these links are revisited, the stronger they get. So retrieving is actually a very active process in which the network or the traces are reactivated again. So all those links are active, and just the act of retrieving the information is helping make those links stronger. It's helping them wire together better. So when you are trying to remember something, sometimes it starts with, an activation of maybe a little thing that is related to it. Like, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of smelling cinnamon and having that remind you of the wonderful cinnamon buns your mother used to make, or a wonderful, meal that you had. And odor happens to be a very particularly salient cue for us. But there are lots of other cues. And when you hear or think or see or smell those cues, when that gets active, it can activate the rest of the network that it's hooked up to. And that's why cues help you remember. So in this retrieving bit, then it's an active activation that is good for the trace, because every time it gets activated, the trace gets stronger. Okay, so now we're into now that I've sort of gone through some of the background material, now we're into what can I do then? How can I use it to make my memory better? Well, I have good news and I have not so good news. The good news is that every single one of you can make your memory better. by knowing some of this information and by using some of these tips. The bad news, or the less good news, is that it takes a lot of practice. And it's something that basically has to become a habit. Just like relearning, how to walk again if you've had an injury. I don't know if there's anyone in here who's had to do that, but it takes a long time to really, relearn something like that. And so developing a way to improve your memory is basically like learning a new skill. And those skills take time and practice and practice and practice. So I'm going to tell you some tips now, and they might work for you right away, but I encourage you, if you're going to decide that you want to use some of them, not to get too frustrated by it, because it does take a while before they can become more habit. So the first thing is, let's talk about those 3 R's. What are they? I've already given you the first one. Receiving. What's the next one? Recording. And the third one? Retrieving. Okay. So I'm going to talk about how can you improve each of those steps and what would be ways that you could do that. Now, I'm only going to brush the surface here, but at least it'll give you an idea of what's involved. So in terms of better receiving, the first thing that you have to do is start with the intention to remember. Gone are the days when you are 3 years old or 2 years old, and it just seems like your brain is a sponge. And the kids learn so much every day. They just seem to be soaking it up. As we get older and older, it has to become much more intentional. And intentional in the sense of then using really good habits in which you approach the event you want to remember, the name you want to remember, the telephone number, whatever. So the first thing to do is to intend. You have to intend to do it. And that intention then turns on that spotlight and that attention that will go better towards giving you that active experience. So creating that story or that network really does depend on making sense of it and associating it with things that you know. And even maybe thinking about it from an emotional point of view, making it personal, and organizing the material. And we've done a little bit of that already. I've told you the 3 R's. That's a way to organize the material to help you recall it later. So there are tricks like that that you can use. Organization is also a way to put together things in a timeline, and sometimes that helps. So for instance, if you've lost your keys, sometimes it's good to just go back in your memory about what did you do, right? What did you do first, then second, then third, then fourth, and kind of create that temporal time frame to help you out. Now I'm going to give you some examples of how you can use associations and logical organization to remember things. The first one is PIN numbers. How many here need pins? Yeah, everyone's got to raise their hand. And how many have more than one? It's like a nightmare. It's like the modern nightmare is remembering your pins and passwords. Well, I'm not saying that this is the best way to do it, but here is an example of how you can use this idea of relating things to what you know and organizing them as a way to retrieve things more easily. So for instance, when you need a 4-letter PIN or 4-number PIN, 4 numbers, they're sort of arbitrary, 2, 3, 3, 5. How are you going to remember that? You know you're not supposed to use the easy ones, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 9, 8, 7, 6, or your birthday, or things like that. But you could make connections between words that you know and numbers, such as If you think about it, cave, if you think about the letters on a keyboard, on a pin pad, cave turns into 2335. And time turns into 8463. Now, 8463 isn't so easy to remember, but time would be a lot easier. It's something that you might know already. And the thing to do is to pick a word that you relate to whatever it is that you're trying to use the pin for, and then you can create the number of letters, or the numbers that you need. Another way to do it is to create a sentence with the same number of letters that you need to remember. So for instance, my dog has fleas is 2, 3, 3, 5. It's a lot easier to remember my dog has fleas, or some other phrase that you might find more relevant. I think right now we'd be saying my dog has ticks, because that's pretty common these days. But those kinds of things, would help you then associate your number to a phrase that you already would find easier to retrieve. Does that make sense? Yep. What about passwords? Well, with passwords, you could create a string of first letters with a personally relevant sentence. So for a bank password, I immediately thought of the Beatles song, "You Never Give Me Money," or "You Never Give Me Your Money." And you could take the first letter of each of those words, and now you have a string of nonsense letters. And if that silly password needs a symbol, because some of them do, then you can use a relevant symbol, like the $ for something like that. And now you've got a longish password with a symbol on it, and that you can use that for your PIN or for your password. The same with the library password. If you use a Libby or the library website, pick the name of your favorite book. The Lord of the Rings for me. And you can use the first letters of that, or use the last letters. But whatever you decide to do it consistently. So you don't have to remember what your strategy is. You make that a habit. But then if you have a book that you really, really like, it'll be so much easier to remember that password. So what we've done here is associated something meaningless to something that means something to you, and organized it in a way that allows you to pull it back out in the right order. Better recording. Well, this is about keeping the brain healthy. This is about getting a healthy brain is an efficient brain, and it can link up better. So exercising and getting physical activity, getting sleep, you've heard all these, decrease your stress. These are all really important for your brain health. Take the meds that you've been given if you are taking meds for hypertension. Keep a good diet. All of those things also help your brain work better and helps with your memory. Better retrieving. Well, the first thing is the obvious thing. Calendars, notes, alarms, lists. They all give you those cues that help you remember. And, if I'm going to the grocery store for 5 items, I can actually create a little story with those 5 items if I want to be clever, or I can just write them down, right? And so you need to sort of decide, what's the best thing for the occasion. But so sometimes these external, helps are the best way to do it. And routines and habits are important, in order to do things the same way. But here is probably one of the more powerful ways to learn something new, and that's called spaced repetition. And what that means is you basically test yourself at longer and longer intervals. So this does not mean just repeating it to yourself over and over again. This means saying it and then waiting a little while with distraction or whatever, and then saying it to yourself again. It's a bit like how I've said, what are the 3 types of memory? Episodic, semantic, and procedural. Okay, so we've been actually doing a little bit of spaced repetition there. What are the 3 R's? Receiving, recording, retrieving. Okay, so when you're trying to learn something, repeating it to yourself. And I use this when I'm going home, and I know I have to remember when I get home to call someone, or especially if I'm driving the car and I can't write it down, I'll say to myself, call Mary. And then a few minutes later, or a few seconds later, I'll say, call Mary. And then I'll wait a little longer, and then I'll deliberately say it to myself, call Mary. And this repeating things again and again really does make a difference in terms of how easy it is to retrieve when you get home. And you want to start with short intervals, and then you gradually lengthen them as you get better and better at it. This is the way I learn my students' names when I'm teaching a seminar. 10 students is above my limit for remembering right away. So I have to consciously relate the name to the face. So I'll go through them all, and then a couple minutes later, I'll go through them again. A few minutes later, I'll go through them again. And then I'll wait a while, and then I'll come back to them. And I tell you, it's a really powerful technique. Okay, this is a talk of 3s. So what is memory? Episodic, semantic, and procedural. What are the steps to a good memory? The 3 R's: receiving, recording, retrieving. How can I improve my memory? Well, hopefully you've been able to see how knowing how those 3 R's work and how they operate at least gives you some hints about how you can enhance one or more of them when you're actually trying to make a new memory. And you have to remember that no memory is perfect. And you don't want to remember everything, so you need to pick the important things and work with those, and don't worry about the unimportant stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff, as they say. And I'm open for questions. And so this is a quick synopsis of what we do. We give memory boot camps. We've done them here at the library, and we've also done them online. And we'll be probably setting up another set in the spring. So if you're interested in something like that, we do the short one is 3 sessions. Happy to give you more information if you're interested. Just send me an email, and there's my email.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. And I find that my memory is really declining as I age. But I wonder about minimizing distractions. Like, I find that a really important part of the workday. Like, you're in a call, there's somebody calling you on the phone, you're getting an email, and every time you start something, you're being interrupted to move on to something else. Like, how does that impact your memory? And obviously, it's not good. But what are your thoughts about that, about minimizing distractions?
Yeah, Rebecca, I mean, that's really about, the distractions make it hard to really focus on one thing, which is what you need for that initial receiving, right? And the experience, the active experiencing. So definitely, our lives have gotten so, it's just so busy now. And, the emails coming in, you see it coming on your screen, you're trying to have a Zoom meeting. And the phone is ringing, and maybe your dog is barking because you're home, and you're working at home. So I think all of those things really work against. the thing about it is keeping track of what is it that's really important to remember, okay? Because we can't always work in a silo where nothing else is going on. So it's really about, okay, if this is really distracting, then maybe the thing to do is to record something that you want to then go back to later that you can now focus your attention on, right? And we've got more opportunities now for recording meetings, for instance, if something is really going on that you're interested in, but you can't pay attention because, the dog wants to go out and other things. So just definitely distraction is a really important one that will interfere with that initial receiving. It also can interfere with, if it's making you stressed out too. I mean, that's not going to help. And also when you're trying to remember something, if the loud music or if you're hearing things or you've got lots of conversations going on, it makes it harder to remember things too, because again, that retrieval is very active. It needs a lot of attention. So, yep, definitely distraction. Thanks for mentioning that.
So, is it fair to say that stress or just any kind of brain injury, and maybe that's what could impact the kind of practices you're talking about, the stress or brain injury generally could impact the memory problem?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think, stress does a lot of things to your brain and your body. And, our last talk was also talking about how stress and the cortisol response could affect how you respond to brain injury. So, you have all of these things happening when you're under stress. And, stress isn't necessarily all from negative events. You can get stressed out from your, upcoming wedding, right? Or the new house that you're finally so happy you got, but now you have to move into it, right? So all those things are stressful. And you have to think about it. When you're stressed out, what are you doing? You're ruminating. You're sort of thinking about, oh my God, is that guest list okay? Who have I put next to? There's so many details you have to remember. Or the move that you're making. Or, the injury that you've had. You're in the rehab. You have to see the physio. You have to see the OT. You have to see the social worker. You've got the schedule you need to follow. All of those things are making it harder to focus on what's important right now. And there is a reason for why mindfulness is becoming so popular, is that it's really about learning how to be in the present and paying attention to what's happening right now. And that is the hardest thing to do. I don't know if any of you have ever tried doing, meditation, but it is hard work initially when you're trying to learn it. And then as you get practiced at it, it turns into something much more effortless. But initially, it's like your mind is a monkey mind. You can't focus on one thing for more than a second or two. So, if you try this, if you just sort of try the little experiment where you're supposed to focus on your breathing and not think about anything else, how long can you actually do that? Now, those who've practiced are better at it, but your mind just goes flitting around. And so it's that monkey mind that really gets in the way of the active experiencing that we need. And so stress not only does a number on the brain, it can also influence the way you're just sort of coping with the day-to-day activities that you're going on. And all of that can be compounded by brain injury, which means your brain isn't efficient anyways, right? Especially depending on where the injury is. Sometimes it could also affect parts of the brain that are actually really important for making memories. So I haven't mentioned anything about which areas of the brain are important for memory, but there's a little area of the brain called your hippocampus, which is sort of deep in the middle of your brain. And it's the one thing that orchestrates all that network connections to make those memories. And if you don't have a healthy hippocampus, then you're not gonna be able to make those connections. And we know this from a number of classic case studies, starting with HM, or Henry Molaison now, as he's now been revealed, who had surgery for epilepsy, and they took out both of his temporal lobes. And in the temporal lobe, you have the hippocampus. And they had to take out both because of his intractable epilepsy. And when he woke up, he couldn't make memories anymore. He could remember he could remember things like what are the meaning of words, facts. His semantic memory was good. And his procedural memories were great, but he couldn't form daily memories. So from that case study, we learned, first of all, that these types of memories can be separated in the brain, and also which areas are really important. And the hippocampus is one area that shrinks as we get older. Another piece of news. Sorry about that. I don't mean to end this on a negative note. The thing is that you can help your hippocampus by using your semantic memory, which stays really strong as we continue to get older. In fact, we get better, we get smarter as we get older, at least wiser. Look after your hippocampus, for sure. Okay.